show, can we please talk about UFC Vegas 33? Terrible bets I placed on there. So if you're new to this show, basically, in a nutshell, I am going to run through the latest current events in the world of the UFC, mixed martial arts in general, combat sports. I do it with a bit of a laugh and a smile because there's some funny shit out there, trust me. I have a look at Troll of the Week, which is my favourite memes of the week, and I also like to place some really terrible bets. And those were all placed on Friday. I do 2 shows per week, and this one is basically the wrap-up show. So let's just have a look at how terrible my bets were for UFC Vegas 33. So we had Bryan Barberena against Jason Witt in the 170-pound division. Now that was a crazy fight. Before I give away the result, if you haven't seen it, woo, head over there and watch it. That one is really worth a watch. I think it was on the main card, actually. I thought it was a prelim, but I think it got bumped up because a couple of fights fell out. But either way, that was a crazy fight. Spoiler alert's about to be coming. So, look, Barberena, Bam Bam, has some absolutely crazy power in his hands. And credit to Witt for being able to survive. Like, in the 3rd round, basically, like, Witt comfortably won rounds 1 and 2. And then, like, he had to go into pure survival mode in the 3rd round. Having said that, I still don't think it was a 10-8 round because it all got a bit chaotic. And Witt was throwing back and actually landed a knockdown of his own. So, when there are knockdowns on each side, I don't think you can really call that a 10-8, and one of the judges did. It was called a majority decision in the end because one judge, Tony Weeks, scored the 3rd round a 10-8 to Bryan Barberena. I don't necessarily agree with that. I see where he's coming from. It was like Witt did look hurt, but he did land knockdowns of his own. So it wasn't one-sided to the point where it was just complete domination. I feel like if you get knocked down, you haven't dominated that entire round. Does that make sense? But I do see why he scored it at 10-8 because, Witt was hurt. Irregardless, either way, only one judge scored it that way, and I feel like the right man won on the night. Now, the reason I was backing Jason Witt in this one, I did back him by submission, so I got that part completely wrong. The reason I was liking him is because he's coming out of James Krause's gym. You need to keep an eye on these guys. Anytime they mention that James Krause has cornered and trained a fighter, I am all in on that fighter, and Jason Witt was no exception. Next up for Jason Witt, I feel like the Max Griffin call-out was very good. Both of them, they want to crack the top 20, and the winner of that one would certainly move closer to that. Next for Bam Bam should be Matt Brown. Could you imagine how good a fight between Bryan Barberena and Matt the Immortal Brown would be? That could headline a fight night easily. Make that one happen. We had also the only other fight that I bet on actually fell out, so I actually only bet on one more of them, and it was terrible. It was an absolute howler of a bet. And so Sean Strickland against Uriah Hall. I backed Uriah Hall in this one because I felt like that if he's going to try and make a run of that title, he's going to have to do it now. And there was no urgency, really. It was kind of disappointing to see because I thought that Uriah Hall might be able to come out and look at least like he wanted to win it. Like, even from the start, you just didn't see any urgency from him at all. And, and he was in kicking range most of the fight, and he didn't push that advantage. Hall should have had a huge advantage when it came to the kicking game, and he just didn't use it. He didn't press on it. Now, fair play to Strickland. Strickland looked sharp, man. His jab was fantastic. He's just a violent man. He got in there, and he beat Uriah Hall up. Do you know what I mean? He really did, and you know what? That was a fight putting Sean Strickland on the map, so fair play to him. I thought that it was a disappointing performance from Uriah Hall. I'm not taking anything away from Strickland. Strickland deserved to win that fight, and I don't think, honestly, even if Uriah Hall had turned up, I don't think that he would have beaten that Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland looked very, very sharp. But, yeah, just it's disappointing to see Uriah Hall he can't seem to get out of his own head. It is disappointing. So next up for Strickland, I think that should be Jack Hermansson, realistically. Jack Hermansson is sitting at number 7 in the rankings. Honestly, that is the fight that makes sense. They're both names at this point. You could headline a fight night with that one, no problem at all. And the winner of it could then kind of start putting themselves in the realms of like top 5s, top 3s, and then maybe start arguing for a title shot. They've both got the personalities to do it, so it'd be interesting to see. So, also a shout out to Cheyenne Byes. She head kick from hell, man. She, like, basically, if you haven't seen it, you've probably seen it already, gifs all over the place, but she let her opponent up, and just as her opponent was getting up, she head kicked her a second time and knocked her lights out. It was fantastic. Earned her a performance of the night, which was brilliant. She thoroughly deserved. And yeah. But that does bring me to a slight point that I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent about right here, because I've got a little bit of a bee in my bonnet. She said, you know, her bank balance was negative, so the bonus meant the world for her. That's great. That's fantastic. But now that opens the floodgates for all the fucking idiots that don't have actually any of the actual numbers whatsoever to start coming out and saying that Dana White is the devil and that the UFC don't pay their fighters and blah, 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 blah. You've seen it. Come on. If I've seen it, then you've seen it. But it's just kind of ridiculous because, yeah, look, at the end of the day, like, she's a UFC. People are saying, oh, nobody in the UFC should be like having a negative bank balance. It's like, yeah, she's had one fight in the UFC and she lost her first one. So look, she's not like an established UFC star, is she? So she might get there, but you know, it's a struggle. Like, no one said that fighting, you know, was going to be easy. So basically, then you've got all the people coming out saying, trying to compare the different sporting companies and how much they pay, and they put UFC at the bottom in red because it's bad that the UFC pay out 16% of their revenue to their fighters, and they throw up these other sports that it's just kind of ridiculous because look, the NFL, the NBA and the MLB, they're such different kind of sports. They're run so differently, it's not even really worth comparing. But since people have thrown it onto this fucking image, I am going to break it down anyway, because I want to do a very quick math exercise, because they throw up those numbers and they just throw up the one number. It's like the whole kind of pay gap thing. Like it's not as simple as just throwing one number up into the air and saying this is bad, right? You've got to look at what goes into the numbers. So you've got the MLB, NBA and NFL all up there. Here's a quick math exercise for you, right? So, okay, yeah, it looks pretty fucking scary there. You've got the UFC at 16% and the NFL at a whopping 48% they pay out of their revenue to their athletes. That's an absolute outrage, isn't it? Well, let's have a quick look. So the number of contracted NFL players in 2020, all these numbers were from 2020, by the way. Number of contracted NFL players, 2020, 1,696. The number of contracted UFC fighters in 2020, 576. So 1,696, right? I don't want to get into like during the point like the smaller numbers, but let's just say that is around 3 times the amount of fighters that are on the UFC roster in 2020. A very quick math exercise. Could you tell me what 16 times 3 is? Because you know, they've got the percentages on there. 16 times 3 is 48. So I would draw you back to the percentage number there for the NFL. Huh? So when you start looking at the other actual things, the other factors that go into it, all of a sudden those numbers don't look so scary. Now, all of that is irrelevant because, like I said, comparing the NFL to the UFC business model wise, it's like apples and oranges. It's not even really comparable. It's a dumb comparison to make. People still do it because they like to push this narrative that the UFC are this evil corporation that are trying to take all the fighters' money and pay them as little as possible, whilst, like, you know, getting them to put their lives on the line. One guy even said, like, the fighters are the only reason the UFC makes any money. I beg to differ. Are they fighters that are the top brass in the UFC? No, they're fucking businessmen because they know what they're fucking doing. Not being funny, but fighters are on the whole very reckless human beings and they don't have a fucking business plan. You know what I mean? So shut the fuck up with that bullshit. So, going back to my point at hand, I told you I had a bee in my bonnet about this shit. So yeah, you've then got, let's look at the more realistic comparison, which is the Bellator and UFC percentages. So people, they love to throw up that percentage, that 44.7%. So let's have a look here at the actual, what goes into it. So you've got Bellator, they do pay a handful of fighters well, but that is at the expense of fighters lower down the card. You have to go back pretty far in the UFC roster to see a fighter that was paid less than 12,000 like minimum. I think the minimum officially is 10 and 10, so let's stick with that. But you have to go, I'm saying I have checked the disclosed purses, and you have to go a long way back before you see somebody making less than 12,000 for a fight. That has largely been the minimum. So, but we'll call it 10, just for the sake of argument. like, between 12 and 16 fighters on every Bellator card make less than $2,000. Some as low as $500, right? So when you look at that, compare that to the entry level 10,000 for a UFC fighter, and you tell me who makes more, right? Basically, Bellator make a big show, they make a big song and dance about paying Corey Anderson more than he's worth, about throwing money after pile at Fedor Emelianenko. They throw piles of money at these big stars who aren't even good enough for the UFC anymore, who just aren't quite ready for bare knuckle boxing yet, and then they throw those numbers out there and they say that the UFC don't pay their fighters. Well, actually, Michael Chandler gets paid more now he's in the UFC than he did when he fought for Bellator. So explain that one, Mr. Coker, huh? No? So anyway, going back to my original point, Bellator, like I said, they pay a handful of fighters at the expense of fighters lower down the card. Now, Bellator, they might pay a higher percentage of their revenue, but that is because they are a smaller business, right? If you're a small business, you can undercut the big competition because you can do a lot of it yourself, right? And they're a small business, they don't put on as many, they're a smaller organisation because their production values are way down. They only put on one show a month versus the UFC, they're putting on a show every single week, right? So the actual cost of putting on a show every single week, not to mention the embedded series, the Ultimate Fighter, the Contender Series, all of that, right? All of that costs money, but it's all there to promote growth, right? Which grows the company, which in turn increases revenue, which actually brings more money to the fighters. Total money, zeros on contracts I'm talking about, not percentages, because at the end of the day, somebody said eventually Bellator will overtake the UFC if the UFC keep paying their fighters the way they do. Actually, the only way that Bellator will ever overtake the UFC is if they stop investing so much of their revenue into the fighters, invest more of it into their product, increase like the viability of their brand, push their growth and then increase their revenue, but their percentage to their fighters will be lower. That's the only way they could ever actually catch up with the UFC, right? So, and the thing is, simply put, the UFC, they have more outgoings than Bellator, right? So the percentage that they pay to the fighters is less because there's only so much you can pay out. But people stating that Bellator pay more than the UFC are just not reading the numbers correctly, right? Because look at this, right? Again, this is disclosed revenue for 2020. I don't have, the only way that you can be sure about any of this is if you're an accountant, you have access to the UFC's books and to Bellator's books, you've got all the receipts, you've got the P&L sheets, you've got all the, like, you've got everything in front of you. None of us have that. I don't have that. These idiots that post these stupid posts don't have that. But I'm not the one declaring that fighters are underpaid or overpaid. I think that, I don't care to comment on that. I just like to kind of point out that they're not necessarily underpaid. You see what I mean? So anyway, people stating that Bellator pay more, they're not reading the numbers correctly because the disclosed revenue for Bellator 2020, 100 million, right? Disclosed revenue 2020 for the UFC, 890 million. So 16%, although, right, I would say that people are going on the low side of that percentage because varying sources state that number to be anywhere between 16 and 18%. More sources actually say it's 18%, but let's stick with 16 because people like to be hysterical and say, oh my God, the UFC only pays 16% of their revenue to their fighters. Shut up, all right? So, 890 million, 16% of that is 142,400,000. Compare that with the 44.7% of the revenue of Bellator, which only makes 44,700,000. So, but I've already thought of something because I bet you're saying, yeah, but the UFC have more fighters on their roster, so per fighter, Bellator pay more. Incorrect, because Bellator, their roster is smaller, right? But it's only about half the size. They've got roughly half the contracted fighters that they have in the UFC. But the UFC, judging by those numbers, in real money, pay out 3 times the amount that Bellator does. So in the UFC, long story short, fighters will make more on the whole, and that is it. Amanda Nunes is out of UFC 265. So yeah, Nunes is out of UFC 265. Good lord, it was a good job they put Gunn versus Lewis, isn't it? That card would be... Well, actually, the card is pretty strong anyway. It's got Aldo against Munoz. That's great. That's a great fight. Chisea versus Luque. That's an absolute banger. Bobby Green versus my absolute favourite, Rafael Fiziev, headlining the prelims. Alonzo Menifield's back against Ed Herman. That's a fantastic fight. You know what? That is a great card. I think that they could actually probably increase the strength of a future card by putting Nunes and Juliana Pena on there. And Nunes is now tested negative. Apparently both her and her wife and her kid are all doing well, and that is fantastic. Good for them. Hope to see the champ back soon. Then we've got Makhachev has been booked against Rafael dos Anjos. That fight has been added to UFC 267 in October, and certainly it's the biggest name that Islam Makhachev has fought so far. But I don't see this fight going any other way than the way it went with Khabib, you know, because dos Anjos, he struggled against Khabib, and Makhachev, he's basically the same fighter, more or less. But you know what? Dos Anjos ain't going there to lose, so we will see. Bellator 263, we had a couple of big wins. Usman Nurmagomedov is not a scary meme of combining Kamaru Usman and Khabib Nurmagomedov. No, it's actually Khabib's cousin, who had an impressive win at the weekend. Nice knee to the liver, bit of ground and pound, lovely stuff. And AJ McKee submitted Pitbull for a cool $1 million and the title at Bellator 263. So yeah, good for him. Now, speaking of Bellator, Scott Coker, based off that, wants to do a cross-promotion with the UFC. Yeah, I bet you do, Scott. I bet you fucking do. Good God. Do you know, that is a fantastic move for Bellator. They get all the exposure that they would get from the fact that the UFC is a recognised brand, and the UFC would get nothing. Why would the UFC ever do that? Look, at the end of the day, it worked with Pride because there was a benefit for both parties, because it was a bit of exposure in a new marketplace for them. Bellator largely operate in the same places that UFC operate, only at a lower kind of rate. So what I'm saying is, I'm sure there are some exceptions, but there are a lot of people that watch the UFC who are aware of Bellator, right? How many people watch Bellator that are not aware of the UFC? Because I bet there are loads of people that watch the UFC that do not watch Bellator. But how many people watch Bellator that do not watch the UFC? You know what I mean? I bet the number isn't that high. Because they're a smaller, like, you know, they are the second tier promotion. So yeah, you're damn right. Scott Coker said, oh, I would be open to it. It's like, yeah, fuck you, mate. There's nothing to gain for the UFC. The UFC have polished their product. They have worked so hard in getting their growth and just pushing everything to get into the position they're in, and that's why they're on ESPN. And even though Bellator is owned by Viacom, Bellator are still on their Spike TV days. The UFC are the UFC finished with their Spike TV days a decade ago, right? The UFC are about a decade ahead of Bellator. Like that, real talk. You know what I mean? So no, that will never happen because there's nothing in it for the UFC. Why would they do that? There's no reason for them to. So let's jump into Troll of the Week. Troll of the Week this week is actually, there's some really funny ones that I have very much enjoyed. And yeah, so this one, the first one, based on Uriah Hall's performance at the weekend, this is fantastic. It's a little mean, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, it's like someone shopping for punching bags and they found a picture of Uriah Hall on their wish list. I believe it's like the Amazon wish list, but that is fantastic. Googling boxing bags coming back with Uriah Hall. Because to be fair, he was a glorified punching bag in there at the weekend. But yeah, and then you've got Scott Coker, wants to cross-promote with the UFC. Hey, he's got like a little cartoon strip there. It's like, hey, we should do a cross-promotion fight with AJ McKee. And Dana White's like, yeah, sure, buddy. I'll get the paperwork. And here you are. And it just says, fuck you on it. Because fuck you, Scott Coker. That ain't happening. And then we have got... Is it the right hook one? It is the right hook one. Fantastic. Then we've got Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis, literally, it's like getting dominated in all 3 rounds, and that is the leak that's coming out of the vat. And you've got Derek Lewis slapping just a bit of tape on, and that's just the one right hook. And you know what? This weekend, big fight. Cyril Gane, Bongamin, taking on the Black Beast Derek Lewis. I'm looking forward to that one because you know what? Derek Lewis is only ever one punch away from ending it. Only ever. And then we have got the last one. Joe Rogan will literally interview anyone. He's interviewing Jon Snow there after he's killed Daenerys. He's interviewing Ed Norton. Is that like American History X? I don't know. Yeah, I think it might be. Either way, Edward Norton is some sort of film where he's being sad, and Rogan's just interviewing them both. I've seen loads of those, and they are all hilarious. But yeah, that is all we've got time for today. I will be back with my picks on Friday. If you are a member of the Patreon, thank you very much. If you want to check out the Patreon, feel free. It's you get early episodes to the picks and some bonus content and stuff. We have a really good time over there. And if you enjoyed this content, please hit like and hit subscribe. And all my social media handles are just up here, just for a moment. Just so if you see any trolls of the week, any hilarious UFC memes, please feel free to send them over to me and I'll put them on, because I love laughing at hilarious UFC memes. But looking forward to these. It's a strong card. UFC 265, strong card, strong main event. I'm looking forward to putting some terrible bets on them, which I'll be putting on Friday. They'll be on the YouTube on Saturday, but on the Patreon on the Friday, because fight picks are better on the Friday. And until then, keep those odds long and those bets terrible.